So Steve Meacher here, as you've heard, President of Friends of Leadbeater's Possum, speaking to you from Talangi on Taungurung country. And so I acknowledge the Talangi people of the Kulin Nations, and also the Wurundjeri and Gunai Kurnai, which is where the range of Leadbeater's possum is, as the traditional custodians of the land we're all on. And also acknowledge with respect any First Nations people who are on this symposium today, and elders past, present and emerging. So this is an image of Leadbeater's possum, and the main thing I want you to get out of this is the tail, which we describe as being shaped like a baseball bat, narrow at the base, broader at the tip, and that's how you recognize the animal when you see it in the forest at night silhouetted against the sky. As usual with this presentation, I've got too many slides for too little time, so I'm going to go through it very, very quickly. But if you want to look back at any of the slides later, ask Louisa to send you the PDF that she's working from. So can you move on? Oh, yeah, go on. The next image, the two. That's it. These are the first two skins of Leadbeater's possum that were collected near the Bass River in West Gippsland and were sent to the Melbourne Museum in 1867. Next. This is an illustration of Leadbeater's possum that was prepared for the initial scientific description of the animal in 1867. So it's the first illustration we have of Leadbeater's possum. And just as an example of how important the art is in this situation, later on in the same year, 1867, Frederick McCoy actually described a bird the same day as John Gould of Birds of Australia fame described the bird, both the same species on the same day. And John Gould's description was accompanied by an illustration, so it was favoured. And if it hadn't been for that, the helmeted honeyeater would now be called Leadbeater's honeyeater. So that's how important art can be in science. And the name Leadbeater came from John Leadbeater, who was the taxidermist who prepared those two initial specimens. And McCoy, who described it, never saw another one. Go on. And the same illustration was used several years later in a book called The Prodromus, but reworked and coloured. Again, the artist would never have seen a living Leadbeater's possum, so he was working from the same drawing with the rather peculiar dangling foot and exposed right front foot, which were included to show the details of the feet in a pose that obviously would never occur in life. Go on. And over the next 30, 40 years, the Kuwi-Rup swamps where the animal was found were completely cleared and drained to create farming land. And this is a painting showing that clearing. By 1909, the animal was not seen, or after 1909, the animal wasn't seen again. And go on. It was assumed to be extinct in 1921. And in 1933, this article appeared in the Weekly Times, which actually Dawn mentioned the Weekly Times earlier. And there you go. There's this illustration, again reworked and given a background, a completely inappropriate background, but a background. But you can see, with no live specimens having been seen in the last 30 years, it was the same drawing worked up again. Go on. And that was the situation until 1961, when Eric Wilkinson rediscovered living Leadbeater's possum at Camberville near Marysville on the 3rd of April 1961. But the important thing in that second photograph was just it was a photograph showing the shape of the tail, which is the diagnostic feature. And there it is. And go on to the Christmas card. And that year, the museum actually included Leadbeater's possum in its Christmas greeting. So it was quite a big thing. And so soon after rediscovery, this set of tea cards was issued. You can see Brook Bond tea. And I was a great collector of these things, particularly if they were anything to do with animals. And this is Leadbeater's possum. It was number 2 in a set of 50 of Wildlife in Danger, illustrated by Peter Scott, son of Scott of the Antarctic and one of the people who set up the World Wildlife Fund. So this was when I would first have been exposed to Leadbeater's possum, and I was 9 years old at that time. And so there was some discussion yesterday about the effect with children, and all I can say about this card is that it worked for me. And it also appeared in Animals later on in that year, 1963, the story of the rediscovery by Eric Wilkinson, which I also, being completely animal mad, I also read that magazine. And in 1971, Leadbeater's possum was proclaimed as one of the faunal emblems of the state, alongside the helmeted honeyeater as the bird emblem. Go on. And it was always recognised that this animal was not widespread or common, and in the 1990s it was actually listed as threatened or endangered under various systems. Go on. And a Flora and Fauna Guarantee Action Statement was set up under the Act in 1995, which became the EPBC recovery plan when the EPBC came in 2000. And by the way, that's still the recovery plan we have in force from the beginning of the EPBC Act. Also, it was recognised that if we were going to protect this endangered species, it was going to need a permanent reserve system in the Central Highlands, which is where it occurs, of course. And that's an illustration of the range of Leadbeater's possum, and the whole range is divided into 21 Leadbeater's possum management units. And just after that reserve system was set up, we had the 2009 Black Saturday fires, and this is part of the reserve system in the O'Shanassy, and it got completely burned out. And this shows the reserve system in green and red. The red, of course, is the bits that were burned, and the green is the bits that weren't burned. So we lost about 45% of the reserve system, possibly about half the entire population of Leadbeater's possum. And so together with Professor Linda Meyer, Dr. Dan Harley, who's now with Zoos Victoria, we applied for Leadbeater's possum to be uplisted from endangered to critically endangered, and that passed in 1995. Go on. And in passing it, the committee said that the most effective way to prevent further decline was to cease timber harvesting within the montane ash forest of the Central Highlands. So that was the advice that the minister accepted in 1995. The minister then set up a threatened species strategy, launched at Melbourne Zoo, at which I asked him, what does it actually mean on the ground for Leadbeater's possum? And he set up an action team that was Gregory Andrews there, who was the Threatened Species Commissioner at the time, and we drafted together a national recovery plan for Leadbeater's possum. That draft was, as you can see, February 2016. It was finalised by the end of 2016, but still hasn't been adopted by the federal government. So we were very frustrated with Susan Lee, and we're now pushing Tanya Plibersek to release that as soon as possible. The work's already been done. So clear felling is the most drastic form of forest management. And this is a picture of George with a log truck. George is a taxidermied specimen of Leadbeater's possum. Happened to be up in Talangi Forest when a truck drove past. Clear fell logging is a highly mechanical means of clearing forests. These machines can bring down a tree every 5 minutes. And the logs are stripped of the bark, put on the back of a truck, and carted off to Maryvale in East Gippsland, where they are pulped and used to make products. There's the Maryvale mill. Used to be used for reflex paper, but as we'll mention later, it's no longer used in reflex paper, but it's used in opal cardboard, which is the cardboard boxes you may receive products in. And the thing is that the boxes have stamps on them saying that the contents may be FSC registered, but the box itself is still made from forest pulp. And here's an area at the foot of Mount St Leonard, a coop called Big Bull Fiddle, after logging, and you can see how it's cleared down to the ground. Go on. And then it's burned, as if the clearing wasn't enough. So, the idea is to replicate a natural burn so that the forest can regrow. These burns are completely different. If you think back to the photo I showed of the O'Shanassy after 2009, you saw the tree trunks still standing. Well, of course, after logging and burning, there is nothing left standing. And you might think it doesn't matter too much if there's only a few coops across the landscape. This is an image of Talangi that I just printed off online on Friday. The blue shapes are the coops, the cutting areas that are on the plan to be logged in the next 3 to 5 years or so. But if you look at the sort of browny green shapes in between, you can see that that's the history of logging in the Talangi area. There's hardly a spot outside the pink areas, which are protected areas. There's hardly a spot that hasn't been logged. So that's, you can imagine how much effect this has on the landscape. Go on. So what are the solutions? Okay, one of the solutions, and involving Professor David Lindemeyer, who spoke yesterday, was to set up a Great Forest National Park. We first discussed that in 2012, and then he launched the idea at a presentation in Healesville in 2013. Go on. And the idea of a Great Forest National Park got support from Zoos Victoria. Remember, it's consistent with the advice from the Threat Species Scientific Committee to cease logging. It was supported by David Attenborough and Jane Goodall. They made statements supporting a Great Forest National Park. And an action statement for Leadbeater's possum was updated by the coalition government. In all but one respect, it was worse than the 1990s action statement. The one improvement, go on, was to establish a special protection zone. When a Leadbeater's possum was spotted, it got a 200-meter radius around it to be protected. Well, Professor Lindenmayer had actually suggested 1,000 meters, but that wasn't acceptable to the coalition government, and they gave a 200-meter radius. So it was a minimal protection. And the first of those areas was surrounding the little red triangle to the left of this slide. It's a coop called Freddo in Talangi, and that was the first 200-meter radius protection zone in a coop. And basically it stopped the logging in that coop. And then a group called Watch and others over the years have continued to find more and more Leadbeater's possums and got all these 200-meter zones. So you can see all those areas have been protected. So although there are only 200-meter radius zones, 12 hectares, there are many of them now, and they are having an effect. And this is the sort of footage. This was actually a video, but you can't see it in the PDF. But this is the sort of footage that Watch gets, Wildlife of the Central Highlands. They have to show that the animal is definitely Leadbeater's possum. So there you're looking for the shape of the tail. It's got to be diagnostic. And then in the same shot, without any editing, they have to pan to GPS to show the exact position. Back to Lily D'Ambrosio. So we engaged Environmental Justice Australia also to apply for a protected habitat order, and we got a very weak response from Lily D'Ambrosio. She didn't refuse, but she basically kicked it down the road, said that she was waiting for further responses. So we decided to launch the court case in the federal court, and one of the best things we did was to include the greater glider as well as the Leadbeater's possum in the court case. And so here's a group of Friends of Leadie's supporters and the legal team outside the federal court in Melbourne. Go on. And of course, you're not allowed to photograph inside the court. So one of our supporters actually was making sketches. There's one to show the judge and Vic Forest Council. And one of the things we did in the court case was to actually have a day of view where we went out into the forest to show the judge what it was we were talking about. And as you heard earlier, we were initially successful with this case, and it was announced as a Franklin Dam-like court judgment, in which we showed that that Vic Forest had logged unlawfully in 66 coops. And one of the immediate effects was that Bunnings stopped selling Vic Forest's timber. And so we were promoted in the Australian, which was interesting because they're not usually very sympathetic to these sorts of things. The little possum bringing an industry to its knees. Go on. Of course, Vic Forest wasn't going to tolerate that, and they appealed the decision. Go on. And that's what took the team to Sydney, the federal court in Sydney. Go on. Unfortunately, Vic Forest was successful on its appeal. They had 31 grounds of appeal, and only one of them succeeded, but that was enough for the federal court to basically overturn the decision of the lower court. But in discussing costs, the Federal Court of Appeal pointed out that Vic Forest had failed in all but one of its 31 grounds, and that we were overwhelmingly successful in establishing facts relating to the breaches of legislative instruments, and those findings were not disturbed on appeal. That is important. We appealed to the High Court, and we did not get leave to continue with that appeal, so that was dropped. But we're currently discussing the costs with Vic Forests, and it will be a 7-figure sum that they have to pay us. So where it led, apart from Bunnings stopping selling the product, it led to a number of other cases. This is just a few of them. Warburton Environment, a tree G-bung case based on our judgment. Kinglake Friends of the Forest, buffers which had to be dropped after the government changed the code. Kinglake Friends and Environment East Gippsland, the Greater Glider cases, which have been really, really powerful. They've got powerful injunctions in place preventing logging in any coop with a Greater Glider within 240 metres. A Gippsland Environment Group got the same injunction covering central Gippsland. And of course, in Tasmania, Bob Brown launched a couple of cases, or the Bob Brown Foundation. So our case has led to a number of other cases that have been quite effective. And Vic Forest is now complaining that this litigation is effectively closing them down. So I wanted to finish with just a brief section on Leadbeater's possum and art. So we'll go through these really, really quickly. The first artworks were often as illustrations for guidebooks on Australian or Victorian wildlife, including this one and this one. Okay, but then there were other artworks. This is a Liz Cogley work, which we're now using as a card, available from Friends of Leadbeater's Possum, and Joanne Piercy, this beautiful illustration of a Leadbeater's possum, and this one by Marion Gould. And these are the last two surviving possums from Lake Mountain after the 2009 fires, and they were taken to Healesville Sanctuary, where she photographed and drew them. The leady has also been used as a design on stamps. This is 1981 and 1983, celebrating Victoria's 150th, and on posters, Threatened Species Day. And we've used it as a ribbon. This is a design done by Sarah Rees for Leadbeater's Possum Awareness Week 2014. Go on. I converted that to an actual paper ribbon that kids can make for themselves. Instructions are on our website. And during Leadbeater's Possum Awareness Week, we encourage schools to get the children to make their own ribbons and wear them. And then that encourages other people to ask what it is. So it's a conversation starter. And that conversation started in various places, leading to this student, Mika Florison, writing her own book. And her grandmother put up some funds for it to actually be published in hardback. I think Mika was 11 when she wrote this. Go on. And this is one of her illustrations. Go on. But her illustrations are not all cute. They show that at her age, she understood what the issues were for habitat. And this is another book by Marley and called Lucy Gumnut Blossom, and tells a story about the possum. There's one of her illustrations, and she actually wrote this as a reading book for younger children. So I live with my family high in a tree, and a little hollow is where I long to be. Another beautiful little book. These are works by a student called Jess Herrera at Swinburne, and her entire body of work for her degree was based around Leadbeater's possum, including 3D printing of sculptures of the Leadbeater's possum and laser cutting of the wallet pendant that I'm wearing now. And they're available through our website, and they've been adopted by the Jiri Jiri, who are a group of First Nations dancers, and they wear wallet, our pendant, at their presentations. Go on. Mandy Nicholson is also a member of Jiri Jiri, but also a traditional knowledge keeper, and seen there wearing her wallet possum. And that leads us to another art form, publishing books and so on. And this is a book where the text is by Auntie Joy Murphy called Willam. Go on. And the interesting thing about this book is Auntie Joy has used language in the text. So we've got here an illustration of Leadbeater's possum, deep in the air in wallet, comes home to sleep in a bark-lined nest inside a hollow tree. Panmin falls on Gerang, flows down Wirrip and soaks into Yanmin beak. So if you're not familiar with those Woiwurrung words, buy Auntie Joy's book, and there's a glossary in the back that tells you what they all mean. But isn't it great that this illustration therefore can be used to promote language? This is another book for smaller children. Count them while you can. Go on. And so there's the illustration of Leadbeater's possum. It's a counting book, and Leadbeater's possum is number 1. And this is a recent book by Jo Watson, Larry Leadbeater. Her illustrations use collage and a number of different techniques, so they're actually very present. It's a fabulous book to look through, particularly with small children. Leadbeater's possum has also inspired other media, including stained glass. Go on. Knitting, jewellery, more beautiful jewellery, metal and glass. Go on. Street art. A question was asked yesterday about cartoons, so I'm finishing with a few cartoons that feature Leadbeater's possum, showing an understanding of the problem. And there we go, Leadbeater's possum homeless in a logged coop. The amazing First Dog on the Moon, and this was a cartoon that he put out after David Lindenmayer resigned from the Leadbeater's possum recovery team in disgust. The inimitable Jill Redwood from out your way in Goongerah. She doesn't mince words. Drop the pollies that drop our forests. Great cartoonist as well as an effective campaigner. Judy Horacek had this one in The Age. It's worth reading. We won't go through it all now, but talking about the word extinct. And then Pope, David Pope, I think it is. And his original text was actually, it was an economic cartoon, but I put the text in that Vic Forest's sustainable logging is a mythical beast. And then this one you may remember from the recent election with Elbow and ScoMo and the elephant in the room. And you'll notice the environment is the dead parrot from Monty Python, basically. So finishing with a couple of Tandbergs. We can't miss Tandberg. So this one survived the bushfires with a koala that made it through the fires in the tree, and now the tree's being chopped down. Pretty potent image, that one. Go on. And then the long-footed potteroo. So this is out in East Gippsland, and the short-sighted bottom liner. Right to the point, vote one Green, vote one Labour, vote one Liberal. And that's where I'll end.
Wonderful. Thank you. The work that you've been doing over so many years is just sensational. We owe you a debt of gratitude, really do.